So I just wanted to start off by saying hello. First of all, I want to say thank you for joining us and extend a warm welcome from Becoming a Doctor and the Virtual Health Careers Conference team. Thank you so much for joining us, and I hope that any sessions you've attended so far have been useful. So yeah, welcome to the Grad Entry Medicine panel. We hope they'll be useful for your application. I'm Gursh here. I'm an ambassador leader at Becoming a Doctor, and I'm also a first year graduate medical student. And I'm joined by two other graduate medical students, Will and Nick, who will be introducing themselves shortly. And I'll just talk you guys through the format of the kind of panel today. So I'll briefly describe what graduate medicine is, because I don't want to assume that everyone attending will be familiar with the programme. We'll talk through our journeys, where we applied. We'll have a bit of a discussion about how we chose which medical schools to apply to, and also talk about the pros and cons of graduate versus undergraduate courses. And I anticipate there'll be a lot of questions. So most of the session will be kind of question focused. So please do put your questions in the chat and we'll be looking at those shortly. Will, would you like to go ahead and introduce yourself? Will?
I think we just lost Will momentarily, but Nick,
sure.
Yeah, sure, I'll jump in. So my name's Nick, and I am just about to go into second year graduate entry medicine at the University of Nottingham. Do you want me to talk a bit about my journey now as well, or?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, so I'm a bit of an odd gem in the sense that I'm one of the guys who comes from an arts undergrad. So my undergrad was actually in French and history, so it's a Bachelor of Arts. So I actually didn't decide on graduate entry medicine until my second year of that course. So that gave me like 2 years to go because I was on a languages course, so I had a year abroad. So yeah, I was really interested in kind of psych and stuff originally, and then the more I learned that I could do the course and did some work experience in other areas, found it really interesting. And yeah, then decided to do it. So I did sit the GAMSAT and the UCAT. My UCAT score was quite average, but my GAMSAT score was high enough to get some interviews. The only thing with mine was because I didn't have any science A levels either. I was very particular about where I could apply to, because any certain place will let you in, but I think we'll talk about that in a bit. But yes, that's a brief intro to me.
Have we got Will back?
We have.
That's fine. I'll go ahead and talk about my journey. So yeah, I'm Garch. I'm a first year going into second year grad medic at the University of Warwick. Before this, I did a BSc in global health at Queen Mary. So in terms of my kind of journey to grad med, I wanted to study medicine kind of from school, but kind of grades didn't work out. So I decided to do another degree first and then apply as a graduate. I sat the UCAT only, and again, because of A levels and my degree not being a kind of biomedical science degree, I also about the universities I applied to, but yeah, we can talk more about that shortly. I think we've got Will back, so if you'd like to introduce yourself and just talk us through your journey to kind of grad med.
Hi, yeah, sorry about that. Okay, so I'm Will. My journey to get into medicine took longer than maybe most people. So I originally applied to medicine when I was in my sixth form in 2012. I got 3 rejections and I got 1 offer from the University of Bristol. Unfortunately, I got a B in my chemistry A-level results. So I went on to study neuroscience at King's, as that was my insurance. Then in summer 2015, I sat the GAMSAT and the UK CAT. And then I applied for Liverpool graduate entry, King's grad entry, Swansea grad entry and Southampton grad entry. I got an interview at Liverpool, but I got rejected that year after my interview. And then the year after that, in summer 2016, I sat the GAMSAT and the UK CAT. And then I went on to apply for Liverpool grad entry, Warwick grad entry, Southampton grad entry, and King's. I went for undergrad that time. In 2017, I got 4 interviews and I got 3 offers from Liverpool, Warwick and King's. And I accepted my offer for graduate entry medicine at Liverpool and commenced study in summer 2017.
you, Will. So I think before we kind of go into more depth about the universities we apply to and why, I'll just briefly summarise what a kind of graduate medicine degree is. So essentially, it's a medical degree for those who already have a bachelor's degree and have decided that they would like to become a doctor. It's usually an accelerated course and they do this often by combining first and second year together. It's also known as the graduate entry program, the JEP at other universities, but also GradMed is kind of the umbrella term for graduates studying on the undergraduate course as well. So we will be kind of talking about the difference in the two courses. So I think we can kind of move on to talking about how we decided on which medical schools we applied to. Whoever wants to go first, Will or Nick?
Do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure, I can do. So I think having applied 3 times, I think the general advice that I would give to other people, based on my own experiences, is kind of apply for a real mix of medical schools. I think that when I first applied, I was very much applying for the schools that were ones that I absolutely wanted to go to, and I was very idealistic about where I applied. So I think I applied to King's, UCL, Brighton and Sussex and Bristol, which was fine. I think the problem with doing that is that if you're desperate to get an offer, then I think you're better to apply to a mixture. So potentially think the universities that look at different things about your application, or what potentially going to look more favourably on you. In my situation, when I dropped one of my grades, I think Bristol was probably one of the worst places that I could have done that having an offer from, as I think they are very strict about what they do and don't let people in with. Whereas I think other universities, certainly I know universities like Liverpool, despite still being good universities to be at, they are slightly more lenient on students who are applying there. So I think my decision changed as I went through my kind of journey of applications, really. And I think by the end, although I was trying to pick universities that I wanted to go to, I was also very mindful of trying to pick universities that I was likely to get accepted to as well, because I think that maybe I was a bit older and wiser, but I think the idealistic element of it kind of was taken away to a more pragmatic approach. And I think you do have to have a pragmatic approach when you're applying and look at your skills and look at what you can offer, and look at who's likely to value that, really.
Yeah, and I think, well, yeah, so I had the same thing, I think, in terms of looking at what you're kind of bringing to the table. Because I mean, so some unis are particular about A-levels, some unis are particular about the undergrad degree. So I know, for example, there are some graduate programs that will only take Bachelor of Science. So that was a load kind of wiped off the table for me straight away. And then there are some that will take you with a Bachelor of Arts, but with certain science A-level requirements. And then at the time when I applied a year ago, there was only 5 that would take you with no science A-levels and no science undergrad degree. And that was Warwick, Newcastle, Swansea, St George's, and Nottingham. So from there, I then kind of was thinking about the exam side. So 2 of them are UCAT, 3 of them were GAMSAT. My UCAT prep was showing that the UCAT was not exactly my forte. So because I only had 4 choices, I went for the 3 that were GAMSAT and then one of the UCAT schools, just because if you've got 4 options to apply to, you might as well. So I think I was quite limited in my choice just with the background that I was coming to it with. But I think, yeah, definitely looking at what they want and what they've kind of focused on in the application process, because it is quite different. But then also the course itself, because I found a lot of people from other med schools that I know that are on the graduate program do it differently. So it's that point at which the kind of graduate course and undergraduate course merge seems to vary. So I know some schools will do kind of 1 year intense with them and then put the graduates with the undergrads, whereas like places like Nottingham, your first 18 months preclinical is kind of as a graduate group, and then you're put on placement. So I think if you've got more options on the table, then definitely thinking about the nature of the course and whether you're quite an independent learner or whether you want a bit more support, because they do their graduate courses quite differently.
Thank you both. So again, my journey was quite similar to Nick's in terms of my choices in terms of which schools I could apply to was quite limited. I remember at the start of the process being so excited, thinking, oh, there's 32 medical schools, which one shall I go to? But then I kind of started to narrow them down based on A-level requirements, the type of degree, whether it's kind of science or non-science. And in the end, I think I was left with only 5 universities, of which 4 were UCAT and 1 was GAMSAT, and quite a big exam, it's quite a big commitment. And at the time I thought I probably won't do it this year. I'll do the GAMSAT another year if I need to apply again. So I ended up applying to Warwick, Southampton, Newcastle and Barts, all of which were UCAT. And then I was offered an interview only from Warwick, and then got into Warwick. So at no point did I have to do much deciding or picking between medical schools. But I kind of Warwick was my first choice anyway, because it's a complete only graduate programme. I think it's one of the only programmes in the UK where it's a big cohort of graduates, and it was kind of close to my home, so I'd have the option of commuting and things. So yeah, that was kind of my journey, but I was very much prepared to, if I didn't get in this time, to do GAMSAT the following year, just to kind of broaden my options. And, you know, like the others have said, you do have to be quite pragmatic and strategic about this. So guys, I'd be happy to talk about kind of the pros and cons of an undergraduate course and the kind of methods of teaching and things, if you kind of have any thoughts on that.
Yeah.
So it's about pros and cons of the graduate course as opposed to doing the undergraduate course.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, Nick, you were going to come in. You go. Sorry.
Yeah. No, I think it's about teaching style. So I know a lot of the graduate programs will use a lot more problem-based learning. I think most of the ones that I looked at applied to, that was their main kind of way of doing it. So that, for those of you that aren't familiar with problem or case-based learning, is where you have a presentation of a patient, and then all of your lectures and anatomy workshops and everything the rest of the week kind of feeds into that case, and you have a group that you kind of work with that case on. It's very independently driven. So I know some graduate programs will use just problem-based learning and won't have lectures and things to support around it. So it's very, very independent. Some will support it with more lectures and things. I quite like that because it gives you time to process things and look at things and explore things in your own way. But then I know some of my colleagues who've done kind of some kind of biomed degrees in the past where everything you need to know is on the slides, and that's how they've gotten used to revising, found that quite daunting because the learning objectives can then sometimes be a bit vague and you don't know what too much detail is. So I think in that you're quite free, but at the same time, it's quite a big skill to kind of get used to that kind of independent learning, which I think is emphasized a lot more in graduate programs. But then what I've found, especially at Nottingham, is when we then join the undergrads in the clinical phase and are on the wards on placements and things, that kind of independent learning really kind of comes into its own and becomes quite a big advantage because you're kind of used to it by that point. So that would be my main kind of thoughts on the differences and the kind of advantage. But then obviously I'm a bit biased because I am a graduate medic. So
yeah, so I think 2 things you said there. I think you talked about, just to pick up what Nick said, I think you talked about lectures and learning from lectures and that side of things, and also that kind of styles of courses and that stuff as well. I think I would say that I think firstly the nature of the course that kind of is, I don't know if there's necessarily a theme with grad courses that they're more PBL or they're more lecture based. I don't know exactly. I haven't looked at all the programs and compared them, and I know people do get quite focused on that as well, and I do think it's something to bear in mind. What I do think is that once you're at the uni, I feel like although you might initially have a preference of how you learn best, I feel like you do kind of adapt to whatever is what's going on. Just to pick up what you said about lectures, I do kind of feel that a little bit, that especially if you've done a course previously, you do definitely develop a bit of a rhythm for learning in that way. So most courses that are, I know certainly for BScs, I don't know about, I know you did a BA, Nick, mine was very lecture based, so it was very much a case of, for the first at least 2 years, kind of learning lecture slides really. So I think, I guess a bit of continuity might help you in the first part. And I think you also talked a little bit about the not knowing kind of how much you have to know. And I think that is often a case with many courses, not just medicine. But that was certainly something that I encountered when I first joined, having done a course before, is that it's just the kind of the style of learning was almost like going back to school, in terms of learning very fact-based rather than learning about arguments and learning about evidence and things like that. Although that is relevant potentially later on, it's just doesn't make up the core of what you do at all. If I was to compare doing it as a graduate and doing it as an undergraduate more broadly, I would say that doing it as a graduate allows you to have 3 years to kind of get used to uni and really enjoy that time that you're there. I think many people choose to do an intercalated degree when they're at uni because they don't necessarily have access to that, and it is a very different experience that you have. You have a lot more free time when you're doing a normal undergraduate course, and having that time to really develop yourself and to have a bit of time to kind of grow up, but also to really learn about a subject in depth, I think it really does help you. So I think that's definitely an advantage of doing a graduate program, is that you've had that extra little bit of experience. I do think that it can be very difficult though when you go into a graduate program. My own experience in Liverpool was that we have a 2-week summer school with just the other graduates, and then we go straight into year 2 of the undergraduate program. And I don't know if I'd necessarily recommend that. I think at the time I thought I would really like to do that, and I thought that it would be just like going back to uni really. But I think I found that kind of going back was a little bit strange. I think going back in many ways to kind of very lecture-based learning, and going back to being with people that were a few years younger than me, I initially thought I would really like that, but I thought actually on reflection I probably struggled with that, and it maybe would have been better going onto a course with all graduates. So although it's a bit of a personal thing, I think it does depend on your experiences before. I think if you're at the position where you're in sixth form and you're trying to choose what the best path for you is, I think if you're sure that you want to do medicine, I think if you're sure that you want to be a doctor, I think go for it and apply. And if you don't get in, don't be put off by going through the graduate route. But I think it obviously it depends on the person. But I think then if you're applying as a graduate, if you're watching this and you're currently studying a bachelor's degree, then I think the main advantage for studying the graduate course as opposed to an undergraduate course is a financial one. And I think we'll probably end up talking about that a little bit, but it works out a lot better financially to be on a graduate course than it does to be on an undergraduate course. So there's a lot of things to bear in mind, I think. But yeah, I think depending on your position, I think if you're coming from a bachelor's course before, I think bear in mind the continuity when you're picking the course, when you're picking the types of course. But if you're currently in your sixth form stage and you're thinking about applying, I would say go for undergraduate, but certainly don't be put off by the prospect of applying for graduate in the future at all, and don't be kind of scared of it as this very competitive, impossible thing to do, because I don't think that it is either. But they're both very viable options, really.
So just probably going to add a bit more to the graduate versus undergraduate. This would be more specific to graduates applying. I know that quite often a lot of graduates want to apply to an undergraduate course because they heard that it's much less competitive compared to a graduate program, which I don't have the figures, and it may be true, but I'd say, like Will said, don't be put off applying to the graduate course if that's something you do want to do, because there are a lot of benefits to it. It's an accelerated course, and people find that quite attractive because they've already spent 3 years at university. They may have given up work to go to university and want to kind of get back to earning an income as soon as possible. But again, there's pros and cons. A graduate course is also more intense than an already intense undergraduate course. So, some people, if they don't mind spending the extra kind of year or two, they will go for an undergraduate course as a grad, because they might prefer the pace of things and it might suit their sort of learning style better. Again, as Will pointed out, financing is kind of a big factor when deciding. If you do think an undergraduate course might be better for you due to the pace and things, it is funded very differently. There's kind of more self-funding involved there. And we can kind of talk about the financing later on if anyone has any questions. But essentially for grad entry med, there's a small contribution from you, and then you can kind of get some student loan and get an NHS kind of bursary and funding for fees and things. So did you guys have kind of anything else that we wanted to talk about before we take questions? No, are we?
Not especially, no. Yeah, I think there's a lot of questions. I think let's crack on.
Yeah, no, they usually are, so it'll be good to kind of answer as many as we can. So, yeah, Dear, if you'd like to kind of, you know, throw questions at us.
Yeah, I've noted down some questions from earlier in the session. So one question was, is it really as competitive as people say it is? How high of a degree classification is the average graduate who gets a place into medical school?
That was how competitive is the graduate course, and I didn't quite catch the question about the degree classifications.
So how high of a degree classification is the average graduate who gets a place into medical school?
Okay, sure, thanks. So did either of you guys want to answer that question? I'm also happy to answer that one.
I don't mind jumping on the degree classification bit, because that one I think is quite interesting, because I think for most people a 2-1. I think the thing with graduate entry medicine is your degree classification is not like your A levels where you've got to have higher grades. It's more of a hurdle. Have you got a 2-1 degree? Yes. Having a first then on top of that, as far as I know, for most graduate entry programs doesn't make a difference. It's more of a tick box almost. And there are actually 1 or 2, for example, I know with Nottingham, my offer actually came through at a 2-2 because of the GAMSAT score. I don't know of anywhere else that does that. I think it's just Nottingham that does that. There might be 1 or 2 others, but so some of them do lower that kind of hurdle a bit, but for the most part, a 2-1 degree, which is I think the average kind of grade that most people kind of come out with, is fine. If you then find that you say got a 2-2 on your undergrad, what they then say is if you've got a master's or PhD, then that kind of becomes the kind of thing to jump that hurdle with instead. And again, with the masters, it's just having the masters. It's not about whether you've got merit or distinction. And that won't kind of set you apart from the bunch, but it'll get you to the stage where the things that will set you apart kind of matter.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, just to add to that, there is a document that the Medical Schools Council produces, and it's on their website. It's a PDF document, and it's got every medical school in the UK and their kind of degree requirements and things, but it also has their competition ratios on there. So whilst I won't be able to answer the first question specifically right now, because obviously it varies for each school, you will find on there the kind of applicant to kind of interviewee ratio and things like that. So that can be really helpful when deciding on where to apply. And also that document also will kind of mention, you know, a first might be preferred, or we use a first to rank people coming in for interview and things. So I would say that's a good document. I'll try and find the link now and put it in the chat so you guys can save it.
I'm just going to briefly come in as well and just say, I think, yeah, you've mentioned the degrees thing. I don't think there's, there's obviously potentially advantages for doing better at any stage, and that tends to be the case. And also something to remember about your degree if you're currently studying is that if you do better in your degree, then you get more FPass points in the future when you apply. That's probably not something to worry about too early a stage. But if you're thinking about how well you need to do, I'd say try and do as well as possible. But yeah, don't break yourself in half trying to do it. I think we've not really come in on how competitive it is. I think I'm not sure if that refers to getting in or if that refers to once you're there. I think both things are inherently competitive. I think it's kind of how you then take that. I think getting in is competitive, but fortunately, because you don't have to be kind of exposed to other people, you're only kind of subject to the result of that. So if you get in, then it's great, and the competition goes away. But I think once you're in, I think I would say that medical school can be a very competitive place, just in terms of how you're pitched against each other. And I think that's the case. I'm not on I've got a bit of a comparison, I guess, but I'm kind of on an undergraduate course. We're doing undergraduate medicine, and I think in many parts it is still very competitive. And I think There is a lot of discussion about that, especially kind of, and you can read it in kind of the student BMJ and things like that. It is a very pertinent part of medical school, unfortunately. So I think that is something just to be mindful of going forward, that it's going to be probably competitive either way. And I think it's just about preparing yourself for responding to that, really. And whether or not you take that on the chin, or if you take it as a pinch of salt in the background, really. I know that probably within the group of grads that we have, I think people maybe from an external point of view have described people as competitive or not competitive, but I think generally my experience is that the people on the grad course are probably less likely to be competitive. I think being a little bit older, and I think having had experience of doing university in a different way, I think people are possibly slightly more accepting of each other and slightly more reasonable than people that have come from school. I think also people have often had knockbacks already. I think by the nature of the grad course is that even though people quite often view grads as people that have kind of come in and they've got all this knowledge and experience, I think it's generally a group of people that have been knocked back from medicine before. So I think people are a little bit more mindful about how they respond to competition and how they respond to failure. So my experience has probably been, if I was to compare the two groups, that overall the graduates maybe are less overtly competitive, and they're less kind of they're more mindful of each other. But that's my personal experience. I'm sure it's different everywhere, but just to summarize, I think competition is part of being at medical school, and it's how you respond to that, really.
Well, the next question was, does joining as a graduate disadvantage you in any way? Have you been able to hear that question?
Yeah, so I was waiting. I can come in on that if you want. Has it disadvantaged us in any way? Not necessarily. I think it's one of those things where everyone is on a slightly different journey in medicine. So even people that are on their undergraduate program, many of them will be graduates as well. I think that the advantages obviously are that you are in a financially better position compared to, like we were talking about earlier, comparing undergraduate courses. And also you maybe have less time. In my case, I didn't have the year of anatomy and physiology, which probably would have propped me up a little bit better than the sort of 2-week summer school that I got before going in and kind of expecting to do it in the background. So it depends on what your final goal is, really. I think if your goal is succeeding in medical school, I think the reality is that if you spend longer there, if you're on an undergraduate course, you have more time to study. So if that's what you're looking at, I guess you are more advantaged in that sense. But you also have to spend a lot more money to do the undergraduate program. And you also end up being, not that it matters hugely, but you end up being like a year behind on your career. So I guess if you're looking at in the terms of your whole lifespan, you're technically losing out on a year's worth of wages as well if you're looking just to get into medicine as quickly as possible. But yeah, I think it goes without saying that if you spend longer studying, then you kind of get ultimately, even an extra year studying, ultimately you're gonna know more at the end, and you may be in a better position to pass your exams. But that's only from my perspective, comparing the undergraduate to the graduate program at Liverpool. I'm sure you guys have maybe slightly different perspectives on that.
I can't really think of kind of any disadvantages really of either studying as a graduate on kind of either of the courses. The only thing I would kind of echo is, as Will said, on an undergraduate course, you do have more time to consolidate. So essentially, the only thing I can think of is there's even less of a work-life balance. So if that's something that matters to you, and if that's something that you would kind of personally categorize as a disadvantage, then maybe. But other than that, I think, yeah, like other than, being a year behind, it's not really anything. But even that, you've kind of chosen to do that. It's not a surprise, year behind kind of thing. So yeah.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think it's the only. I mean, like you guys said, the only disadvantage to it is quite often time. And I think the other thing to consider is that the disadvantages that we've kind of talked about, if you plan for them, they're not disadvantages. So things like finance and being able to work, if you have a couple of years out after uni and take that time getting some savings, then the kind of finance side can become a bit less of an issue. I think the only other thing, like you said, kind of there's a bit more time and a bit more breathing space in a regular undergraduate course as a graduate. So if you're thinking that you might want to do some part-time work and stuff, it's not impossible on the graduate entry course, because I, for example, and a couple of my friends do part-time work, but it's a lot harder to squeeze in than it perhaps would be on the 5-year course, where you've got that little bit more kind of breathing time.
Thank you, guys. Another question was, how do you find sitting or prepping for the GAMSAT, and do you have any tips? So, Gursh, do you want to start on that?
So I haven't taken the GAMSAT, so I'm going to pass this one over to Nick and Will.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is a long exam, and it always daunts everyone. And whenever you talk about it after you've done it and you're all in med school, everyone always kind of laments how horrible it was as an exam. I think in terms of like preparing for it, there's a lot of free-ish resources out there. I wouldn't pay for anything for the GAMSAT. Plenty of people I know did really well on it without paying the however much money on a lot of the courses. And I know, for example, there's some really good kind of widening participation groups that are bringing some GAMSAT stuff out soon, because I'm helping them with it. So We Are Medics on Instagram, for example, they've recently done a big UCAT booklet, and then I'm working with them now on like one for the GAMSAT as well. So there's lots of stuff out there. I think I've kind of gone off a bit of a tangent now just about the GAMSAT, but I think it depends, again, what background you're coming from as well. I think a lot of people with GAMSAT prep get quite bogged down, especially in the science section, on the knowing things. And it's not as much the knowing things, but more understanding concepts and being able to apply them. And I think that's probably the biggest pitfall people make in their GAMSAT prep, and the biggest advice I always give whenever I'm talking about GAMSAT is make sure you've kind of got the core concepts for the science, and it's the same in the reading. And actually it's about your understanding of whatever graph or piece of information they give you. That's the skill that will kind of benefit you well. So practicing reading pieces of science information and then understanding them, I would say, is a really key kind of part of the GAMSAT. And then those kind of skills transfer into the other sections of the GAMSAT, where you're doing the same, but with kind of more humanities texts.
GAMSAT is a really hard exam. I think it's really supposed to be a hard exam. I think it's supposed to test you and test the highest graduates from the highest level. So it will be testing people that come from all different backgrounds, that, you know, maybe they've done not just degrees, masters, PhDs, maybe people from academia, maybe people from journalism, maybe people from all sorts of backgrounds. So it's just to remember that everyone's going to find it really hard, and it's supposed to, no one's supposed to get 100% in it. So that's the point. I think the length of it is really something to bear in mind as well. And I think by the end, it really is a question of concentration. I think I'm being sat in the science bit, and it's like a 3-hour paper anyway, on top of doing a whole day's worth of exams. And I think I almost think that's kind of built in to imagine, like, what would you be doing if you were, you know, 8 hours into a night shift and you're trying to prescribe some medication. I think it is just a test of like stamina, really. In terms of preparation, I sat the GAMSAT twice. One time I revised and did study prep for it, and one time I didn't do any prep for it and I got the same score twice. I wouldn't take too much from that. I do think you can get better at it from doing work, but I'm not quite sure exactly how to do better on that exam. I think it is a test of your core skills in many ways, but also I think it very much depends on how it goes on the day as well. It is very much, you can do a lot of preparation, but you have to go in there and work really hard when you're in the exam. And I think potentially maybe I got lucky the first time, and the second time I didn't get so lucky. But I would definitely echo what Nick said about learning the science, and what you said about learning concepts. I think in many, it is a lot about using your skills in the exam, trying to stay cool and looking at exactly what it's asking for, because I don't think there's any way that you can learn all that science without taking about a year or two to sit down and learn all of it. I think is for people that haven't studied that stuff before, I think it's worth going over some of it, but I think it is very much about adapting your knowledge rather than trying to be ready for every different situation and every different question, because you're just not going to be able to do that, I don't think.
I think that's the whole point, because I mean, you know, there's no syllabus for it, so in that very nature, anything scientific could come up. So that kind of core understanding of concepts is why it's so important. And I think, yeah, what you're saying about it being the physical intensity of the exam is a big part of it. So the only other prep that I would always recommend people is the only thing I would ever recommend anyone spend money on for the GAMSAT prep is maybe one of the practice papers. And if you have the time or a day off in the weekend, is to have a go at doing at least the sections in a timed condition, because it's a bit like a marathon, and you've got to, training for it will help in terms of being able to sit and do that full day of exam, which is probably the hardest part.
Another question that was asked was, are there differences in personal statement for undergraduate and graduate entry? Do they expect different things?
Well, actually, you get to speak on the last question.
So just to check, do kind of universities look for different things from grads and undergrads?
Yeah, so are there any different requirements for grads and undergrad personal statements? Are the expectations different?
I don't really think they kind of are different, but I do know that kind of universities, Warwick specifically, they do have very specific work experience requirements, and of course they're a graduate-only university. So I think there aren't any things you need to do differently, but I think there are things that you can show differently being a graduate. So I know a lot of people in their interviews rely on experience and examples from their work, things they've learned, and just the kind of the benefit of being a more mature student. So yeah, I don't think there's anything really that they look at differently. Again, just using Warwick as an example, again, they don't actually look at your personal statement at all. And everything is kind of competency based and assessed in the MMI interview. I don't know if Nick or Will had anything to add.
I think the only thing I would add is that like you said, most places now do mini multiple interviews, so they don't really even look at the personal statement, or the personal is a very small part of their overall application. The only thing I would say on the flip side of that is some places like Swansea, for example, which is entirely graduate entry. Swansea's interview format is different in that they do two 15-minute, I think it is, panel interviews, which will be looking at and through your personal statement. So it depends where you're applying. If where you're applying is all MMI, the personal statement is obviously important because you have to do it, but it won't be used as such in the same way that it would be somewhere if you're applying to somewhere like Swansea, where they do the much more old school kind of panel interviewing.
Yeah, I would say agree with what you guys have said, and just kind of reiterate that. I think universities are looking for the same stuff on the personal statement. For at the end of the day, the job at the same is going to be the same, whether or not you've come in for a graduate route and undergraduate route. So they're looking for the same skills, the same types of people, and the same things they want to develop in you. I think potentially when you're applying for graduate medicine, you have to bear in mind that there'll be many people like myself who had spent a lot of sixth form gaining experience, and therefore you might find that you're up against people who already have a raft of experience there. I've never been on an application thing or read other people's personal statements for university, so I don't know that for sure. But don't let that put you off either. I think at the end of the day, the skills and what you've learned from what you've done are the most important things. So even if you've been to, you've watched surgery in India, or you've helped do, I don't know, you've been volunteering for MSF or whatever, if you can't say what you've learned from it, then that's the most important thing. So you can learn the same skills from doing simple volunteering things as you can from doing all the other personal statement things as well. I think also ring up the universities and look and ask them what they're looking for specifically, because people do prioritize slightly different things between them. Ring up the universities and ask them what they want to see, and they can only say no. And then when you write your personal statement, once you kind of have an idea of who you want to apply for, make sure you really bring out those things in the personal statement. It might be that certain universities want to see more teamwork and leadership, or things that you've done at university, or it might be that they want to know more about your volunteering or more about your hospital experience. But ask them and see what they're looking for. But what they're looking for won't be vastly different from you as a graduate than it will be to someone who's applying for an undergraduate program. I don't think personally, but definitely ring them up and ask them the question.
Thank you, guys. The next question is, does having a science degree come useful to you in your medical studies, and does it put you at a higher advantage than other graduate entry applicants who directly who come from a science, non-science background? Nick, do you want to start on that?
Yeah, I mean, I can come at it obviously from the other side of being the non-science background. I know I've seen a couple of questions of kind of my experience of that. I think the thing is, and one thing that I was told on when I went to the open day at Warwick, actually, quite a few of the graduates there were very much of the thought process of, at first, it looks like the science graduates have that slight advantage, but within a month or a couple of months, everyone's kind of on the same level. Because at the end of the day, medicine is a very different science to things like biomed, or if someone's done neuroscience for their degree, there are certain areas they'll be good at, but actually it's such a different thing. I think one thing I found a lot was that I was coming to topics very fresh because I had no knowledge of it previously, which meant that I was kind of taking in the surface level that we were told we needed to take in, whereas a lot of my colleagues who had come from science degrees kind of had looked at this thing in, the clotting cascade in a lot more detail before, so wanted to go away and look at this in more detail, and ended up kind of almost stressing themselves out. So it almost, that experience for some of us almost had that, like, the inverse of what you would expect, I think. But I think, I mean, we had results recently, and if you looked at the results from end of year, I don't think you would be able to look at the results table and say who was science and who was non-science background. So I think it can feel in the first month or so as an arts graduate that you get a bit left behind, but you quickly catch up.
Completely kind of agree with Nick. I know that at Warwick there's kind of a lot of support for non-science students, teaching, and they do student seminars and things to really help you get up to speed. But yeah, it's kind of quite hard at the beginning because, the people that have done biomed, they might just be kind of completely relaxing for the first semester because they've kind of covered everything that is completely new to you, but you do kind of end up on the same level kind of in no time, really.
Yeah, I think I kind of agree with you guys. I would say that my background was in neuroscience. I think I definitely agree with Nick that, like, the level that you're doing stuff at is very, very different in your degree from what you'd be doing when you do medicine. It's just it's arguably not even like a surface level. If I was to take neuroscience and neurology, you're just looking at things that are almost completely different. But in some ways, doing neuroscience has really helped me. Like, I'm got my trying to revise my finals at the moment. I've got my revision cards next to me, and I've been using for my previous degree to help me to revise for my finals. So I do think some stuff does carry over. And I think if you have done a very broad degree before, like I know there were two students that studied pharmacy before they came to study graduate medicine. And I felt like they had a really big advantage over us. And they very much easier for them to hit the ground running, having studied a lot of this stuff at a similar level before. But with the exception of degrees that are very practical or have already worked in healthcare, I would say everyone has kind of a little bit of an edge, and it's just about how you bring that. And, like, to be honest, like Nick said as well, I think actually coming at many of these things from a background initially can kind of hinder you a little bit, because you're thinking, oh, I want to learn more about this, and you've kind of almost forgotten a lot of the real basics that you have to know so well. So it's different for each person, but it can definitely advantage you in some ways, I think. But yeah, not to put anyone off who's done an arts degree. I think Nick's an example of someone that shows you can easily catch up and be as competent as everyone else as well. So.
Thank you, guys. I'm just conscious that we're coming to the end of the session, so if we could finish with one last question. There was a question on what support groups are there for graduate medical students, and so if you want to talk a little bit about support that you have and how you cope as a graduate medical student.
Yeah, happy to start with that. So I'd say in terms of support, again, I can only really talk on what I have at Warwick, and there's a lot of support from students in the year above. They really kind of do take you under their wing and help you kind of get to grips with the concepts by running teaching in the evenings and on weekends. They run a lot of sessions pre-block, so often there's teaching on a Saturday or a Sunday, where they'll go through all the basics so that when you do come to approach them, when the block starts, they're not as daunting and things. So yeah, there's a lot of support at the university, but I imagine this kind of varies. So I don't know if Nick and Rob wanted to touch on that.
Yeah, I can quickly come in on that. I think I would say just very firstly, more broadly, if I was to compare the support that I needed in graduate entry medicine compared to the support that I needed when I was doing a BSc, I think that when you go to medical school, don't underestimate the amount of support that you'll need from other people. And that is even in the very most basic thing of practicing for your exams, not necessarily in terms of social and emotional side. So doing your OSCE exams, which are your clinical assessments. So that's when they assess how well you're going to perform in your clinical environment and how well you can examine and ask questions. You absolutely need to rely on your friends and colleagues who are studying medicine alongside you to help you to do that. And I think if you go to medical school and you fail to make those connections, it makes it a lot harder for yourself. So I think my experience was certainly kind of about developing those. I would say it's really important to develop those social networks around you, people who are on your course, and to establish that really early on, of people that can help you and you can help them as well. I know that there are other kind of support systems in the university for kind of well-being, and also you have kind of systems within the university which come along and give you a bit of a shake-up if you're not hitting the grades that you need as well. So the support systems in the university do exist, but I think a lot of it is very self-directed, and having people around you and having societies and groups and making sure that you develop that when you go to medical school is really important. Way more important than when you're doing a BSc, where you can essentially go to your lectures, put your headphones in, turn up and pass the exam, and you don't even have to speak to anyone else in the course if you don't want to. Medicine is not like that. So I think that's something to be prepared for when you do go, and something to bear in mind when you do get your place and start studying, I think.
I think, like Will was saying, a lot of the welfare side, I think often with these degrees does come from like the community that you kind of make out of it. And I think when you're on a graduate entry program, especially, you end up in such a weird, unique situation to kind of like be a little bit older but still at uni. So you're all on the same course, and most of you are doing it for the same reason. So you have a lot in common straight away. So I know, for example, here at Nottingham, for example, we kind of had to sort out housing when we started, but we didn't know anyone. So we all just kind of like picked houses at random, and for pretty much everyone it worked out fine because we were all then on the same course going through slightly different but generally similar things. And then, yeah, societies and stuff I think is really good. I think definitely pick up some sort of hobby or sport, and most places will have them, and most places will have like a medics group, which will be a more informal one. Because I know sometimes people don't want to take part in uni sports because, you know, you've got to then go and compete and stuff, but a lot of them will have more of a like social one. And I think, again, you can find like a really nice community there.
Thank you guys so much for joining us today at the Virtual Health Careers Conference, talking about graduate entry medicine. I really enjoyed your talk, and I'm sure the audience did as well, and it was extremely useful. So thank you so very much.
That's fine. Thank you so much for all the questions. I'm going to say I've seen there's a lot of questions in there. I'm keen to help people to answer those. I'm going to put my Twitter bio in there if you want to ask any more questions. You can send me a message on Twitter or something, because there's a lot of people in there that are asking questions.
I'll share mine as well. So.
Yeah, should we put those in the chat, or should we send them to you?
If you put them in the chat, I will pin them available for a period of time, so that I'll make sure that they can make sure they catch it.
Yeah, I just wanted to say one final thing. I know we're out of time, but yeah, if you are going to be applying, I would say just keep, try and try again. A lot of people don't get in on their first attempt. I think the average number of times people apply is between 2 and 3 times. So yeah, keep going, and yeah, we'll leave all our details below. I've linked some kind of other stuff on the Medical Schools Council website. But yeah, it was lovely to speak to you all. Thank you, Nick, Will, and Dia. Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys.